Hello and welcome to another episode of Future Learners. I am your host, Brett Campbell, CEO and Chairman of Euka Future Learning, and I'm joined by the one and only, the founder and head of education, Ellen Brown. How are you today, Ellen?
I'm very well, thanks, Brett.
Very good to hear, Ellen. So firstly, just a shout out to those listeners who have jumped over to iTunes, Spotify, and dropped us a 5-star review. And of course, to those who have recently subscribed to our YouTube channel. So we do this podcast over all available BAT channels. Wherever you can listen and you can see, we will most likely be there producing this show for you. So if you prefer to watch on YouTube, head over to YouTube, Euka Future Learning. You can subscribe, get notified every time an episode goes live. Today's episode, Ellen, we are going to be speaking about something that is really interesting to me because the more rabbit holes that I've progressed down as it relates to this topic, the more, I would say, outcomes are produced. And what I mean by that, the topic that we're going to be talking today is essentially around learning preferences. So, types of learning preferences. How do we identify our child's learning preferences? And then, of course, how can we create a learning environment to harness those particular learning preferences? So that is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to hand to you, and I'd love for you, Alan, because I know you've done a lot of work in this area as well, is let's just do a high-level, introduction of learning preferences. What are the 3, 4, we'll talk about the 4 key learning preferences here today, but how does learning preferences and so forth relate to, education and learning per se?
Yeah, so look, sometimes the first time a parent even hears about learning preferences is when they're going through this, let's get an educational program together and how will I help my child learn? And interesting, they probably don't even know their own learning preference, and that's something to actually spend a little bit of time on. And we had a guest recently, Brooke, who was speaking about the fact that she knew she was an auditory learner. She learns best by listening. And so she was trying to teach her child in the same way that she learns. And that's where there was a disconnect. And that often happens to kids when they're in school, when you have a teacher who has a certain learning preference and then, they are trying to teach in that way and it's not the way the child learns best. So that's just a roundabout way of saying we all learn in different ways. And there are 4 that we can distinctly talk about, but and we've all got a bit of each. But you could be an auditory learner where you learn best by listening. You could be a visual learner where you learn best by seeing something. You need to see a map or a diagram in order to know what make sense of something new. You might be a kinesthetic learner, which is a hands-on learner. You prefer to actually make something than read about it. Those kind of people don't necessarily like the instruction booklets. And then there's the reading and writing learners who need to just write it. They need to write it down, and then process it that way. So they're the different styles we're talking about.
And as you're probably listening to this, your head's probably nodding and, oh yeah, there's that. I'm probably more this. And, as you were going through it, I certainly, myself, my learning style is definitely kinesthetic is my primary, I would say. And this is a real big caveat because the further down the rabbit hole you go of learning, the further you realize that each of these areas can be highlighted in different parts of learning, right? So I really like audiobooks, but only certain types of audiobooks, right? I like visually learning through seeing, but only certain things. So I can learn some things better by one of the other modalities, versus the other. So it's not a thing here where you identify that your child loves being hands-on and they like learning through doing and moving, which is the kinesthetic learning, is it doesn't necessarily mean you need to now adapt everything to be kinesthetic because that's just not how the world operates. But, as you mentioned a little bit earlier with Brooke, with her son Noah, is he listens to audiobooks and he retains so much more information and he's able to have discussions about it. It's interesting, actually, even if we talk about the kinesthetic just for a second, because I love reading books. Excuse me. I love reading books. I loved it that much that I almost bloody passed out. So I love that. I love the feel of reading a book, all right? Because you read it on a paperback book versus you look at it on a Kindle, right? Two very similar outcome, but two very different situations. Like there's something for me about turning the paper and knowing how far I'm through and knowing how far I've got to go in the book. But then I find that I personally can consume probably if I looked at I've got quite a large collection of handheld books, paperback books, etc. But I'd say my audio library is probably 10 times what maybe even more to be fair, than the paperback types of books. So it's very interesting to see where you learn best, because I think a lot of I know myself, and I'll say this, and a lot of students that I sort of speak to more in that, let's call it the business world, is they feel that they have to read a paperback book, and like you're not successful if you're not reading a book a week, right? And it's this whole thing around how learning has been created and the shackles that we place upon ourselves to learn, right? So I just, again, why I'm talking about that and why I want to frame that up is it's very important that as what we're about to go through, and we're going to share different ways on how to identify, what your child may or may not, or shouldn't be, or should be potentially spending more time doing. Don't get caught on a singular way of doing something, because it's different for everyone and everything. But there's some really cool things that we'll be able to share on how you can identify that. And then at the end of the day, let the proof be the pudding, right? The proof is in the pudding. Let the proof be the pudding. I don't even think that's a saying.
It is now.
But it is today, Ellen.
Yeah.
Here on Future Learners. There we go. So, Ellen, how you've obviously you've got more children than me. You've had more experience around the teaching world than me, obviously. What have you identified, and as it relates to different learning styles? Like, what are some things that you could see sort of early on and figure out, and anything else you can sort of share around that to start with?
Yeah, that's actually the key, what you said about what you can figure out, what you can see. Observation and reflecting on what your child's doing is one of the biggest and most important ways of seeing where they learn best, what they're naturally drawn to doing. And so, yes, there's lots of self-assessment checklists and things like that, questionnaires and things that you can do to identify that. And as an adult, that might be really helpful for you to know that about yourself. But if you actually put into place a bit of observation, writing down some notes while you're observing them doing, a lesson that involves the different learning styles, and you'll start to say, oh, yes, my child gravitates to the hands-on, but when I say, let's get the activity sheet out and fill that out, he starts sliding off his chair, that kind of thing. They're very obvious, kids don't hide things. But like you said, there's going to be crossover. So you don't sort of go, okay, we're going to throw out all the activity sheets. We're only going to do all the hands-on, because that can get boring too. And so you don't want anything to be stale. But you might say to yourself, as a parent, I've been doing, it's trial and error. I've been trying a few different things, and I can see that my child's way more engaged when we learn in this particular way. And then you plan around that. So it's starting by observation, making some notes, trial and error is a good one. And if you need to, if you find
how long would you observe for, Ellen? How long would you observe for? Before you can go, what, I think I've got conclusive evidence that my child really does not like auditory learning.
Look, I would be definitely leaving it more than a week, because sometimes you just have a bad week, don't you? Or a bad day, I would let lots of people who start home education will start and say, within the first couple of weeks, they get into the hang of things. So, within the month, you would know where you were headed as far as what your child enjoys most. And you wouldn't want to do a gut reaction thing straight away and go, this is where their learning style is. We're going to focus just in this area. You wouldn't want to do that, because, we all change too. So yes, right now in grade 3, my child might be much more into the auditory learning, but you might find by grade 5 that's shifted and changed. Well, we're not necessarily stuck in one particular learning style all our lives either.
Mm. And I think to double tap there is the other thing to be very aware of is you don't want to eradicate a learning style either, because you're going to remove a certain level of skills that are, created via doing that. So whilst your child might not like listening, when I say listening, what child likes listening really? Your child might not like learning via listening or listening to audiobooks, or it might be hard because they are getting super distracted. You can now minimize that, but I would still encourage you to make sure that there is that form of learning as well involved. Because if we take it as an example here, and there's lots of different ways of learning auditory as well, not just talking about audiobooks here, but I can only listen to audiobooks and retain information, right? Because this is the other part. There's putting something in your ears and listening to it, or there's putting a video on and watching it. But the real outcome we're trying to get here is like the completion of and the lesson learned, right? We're not just, the task isn't watch this 30-minute video and that's your task to complete. It's like, did you learn the outcome that was proposed from this thing? So for me though, I cannot listen to audiobooks if I am doing nothing. Like I can't just sit there and again, this is obviously more about my behavior than anything. I mean, I can sit there, let me just say that I can sit there, but I really do not like just sitting listening to an audiobook, right? Because what I find is if I'm listening to an audiobook, I might be on my phone doing something else. And that's very distracting. And I've gone 20 minutes through the book and I'm like, I don't even remember what was even said there. So it's actually a complete waste of time. What I find is when I combine auditory with visual, so and auditory with written, is I'll be listening to the audiobook and I can read along in the audiobook as well. And that applies the depth of connection because I'm learning through two modalities, right? So we can always be learning in multiple modalities as well is very, very important. But something I just really want to make sure I make a point of there is always include all variables of learning. Try to amplify those that your child can actually benefit from a lot more, right? You don't want to be doing hands-on activities every single day, to create a specific outcome. It's really finding that blend. Because here's the thing is, once a child finds their modality of learning, they will quickly be able to find the things that they're passionate about and they enjoy, and then they'll want to expend a lot more time, effort, energy learning. So we use Noah as an example, right, from our previous episode. Young boy with learning disabilities, as soon as his mother found out that he likes to listen, auditory learning, she then put him on that path, and then she found his passion, which was dogs, and then they just went and got every piece of content around dogs, right? So it's a path to finding what your child is interested in as well, because it's not just the interest topic, it's the way in which the topic is delivered as well. That's a very, very important thing.
I really like that, Brett, because what you're saying is really important, and it's actually even curriculum based. So, you might be doing lessons and your child is enjoying one particular style of learning, but learning this, if your child's not an auditory learner and you know that, it means you can be a little bit more proactive about the skills of listening and building that into what you're teaching your child, because obviously as they're going up through the years, listening is going to be something that they're really going to need later. You know now, when you know the learning style that your child has a preference towards, you'll know where you'll need to put in some specific learning. So it might be about listening, or if your child is not necessarily a visual learner and finds diagrams and charts and maps really tricky, you'll be able to do some real specific learning in that area to give them confidence, because sometimes our learning preference can look like it's a preference when really it's not feeling confident with a certain thing, like charts and maps and diagrams. So if your child finds those really tricky, instead of going, "Oh no, that's not their style, they don't really particularly like those," then you could say, let's do a treasure hunt and let's use a map. Let's start sort of demystifying some of those things that can sometimes be a roadblock as well. So making sure, like you said, Brett, that even though there's a certain preference of learning and you use that to your advantage, that then you actually also make the choice to be specific about and purposeful about making skills and lessons to do with those skills that are not necessarily natural to them.
Yeah. I used to teach this in a workshop many years ago, and it was something that I would always say at the start of the workshop is, you can come to a 2-day workshop and you can be sitting there in a seminar room and you're listening to someone talk, and that might be great. You walk out, you're really excited. You're like, yes, I've got great information on it. I can go and apply. But then the next day, 2 weeks later, you're like, I don't even remember what I went to listen to, right? You might remember a couple of things because they're connected through story, which is another thing to talk about when it comes to amplifying learning. But I used to share some metrics, and I've got them here as well. And I think this will be really important for people to know and understand. So this here was, there's a concept called the learning pyramid, was developed back in the 1960s by the NTL Institute of Bethel. All right, so that's in Maine. And the numbers, how it sort of looked is 5%, right? So this is how learners retain information, okay? And this is the whole point of it. It's not about how information is delivered. Retainment of information is key. So 5% of people, 5% of what they learn when they've learned from lecture. Okay, so you'll remember 5% if you've learned it from a lecture. So you go sit in a lecture room, like I did at university. I think I'd be lucky to have retained 5%, to be fair. But when you're being lectured to, right? 10% of what they learn when they've learned from reading. So if you just read something, right, you generally, unless you got photographic memory, you'll learn and retain 20% of what they learn from audio-visual, 30% of what they learn when they see a demonstration, so seeing that actual thing in practice. You'll retain 50% of what they learn when engaged in a group discussion, right? So it's the ability to be able to communicate about it. Hey, what did you see here? What did I see? Well, I thought this, I thought that. Because, again, different parameters you'll be able to pick up from other people's thoughts that you haven't been able to gauge. 75% retainment of what they learn when they practice what they've learned. Okay, so that's that repetition, the skill of repetition. It's you go somewhere, you learn something, you go back, you keep practicing, you keep practicing, you keep practicing. But you'll be able to retain 90% of what they learn when they teach someone else and they use it immediately. So this is why, for me personally, as I've gone through my education journey and learning, and I'm so curious about so many things, the problem I had was, excuse me, I'd want to learn so much and I'd read so much about so much, but then I'd just forget it all. I'm like, I have to put my the time and effort that I'm putting into this I need it to yield the results. So I wrote a quote in my book, and it's the methodology of how I've, I guess, adopted to learning, right? So it's learn to teach to know to share, and share to inspire. Okay, so learn to teach. So if you adopt in anything as though you have to then, after this, you have to go and take this and teach it to someone, you're just by proxy of knowing that you have to go teach it, and knowing that if you turn up to teaching this and you don't know it, it's just going to create this, oh my God, I'm embarrassed, I need to know. So it automatically changes the way in which you approach learning. Okay, so and then of course the teach to know is really teach it so you really know it, and you can become don't have to become a master at everything. But so what I would always do is, in my early days of when I was in the health and fitness industry, was I would go and take complex studies, around fat and hormones and physiology and so forth. And I would read the studies and I go, how do I then take this and now, one, retain the information, because it's very important information, but then how will I retain it for a long term? So what I'd do is the next day, I would go into when I've got my clients, I would go and tell all 10, 11 clients that I'd have in my one-on-one training sessions, I would go and tell them the same piece of information I learnt yesterday. And I could sit here right now, and I won't do that to bore you to death, but I could sit here right now with like a couple of hundred tidbits of information that I've retained 15 years ago that I never would have retained if I didn't go through that element of repetition. So this sort of just feeds back into the initial thing of, it's not just one or the other here. It's as you can see here, it's the ability to bring all of them and infuse them together. And then that concept of obviously teaching and using it immediately. That's where I highly encourage every family member or every parent who learns with their child, or their child does learning, actually at the end of the day, sit down and do a recap of your day every day and get them to teach you something. Because I'm telling you, the retaining of information for your child will just be absolutely enormous. Can't speak highly of that enough. Any thoughts to that, Ellen?
Oh, I think that's fantastic. And even as a family, to have that opportunity to sit around the table or, sit together in the evening and talk about what you learned, that is such a valuable thing. And I know from my own experience, even with, teenagers, they're really keen to let you know. Like, you think to yourself, oh, the little ones are always keen to tell you what they know. And generally that can drop off by the time they turn into teenagers. But if they know that's something that becomes a bit of a tradition that you do most nights, then they actually are quite eager to share something that they know. So they're very proactive about learning it during the day. So really agree with you on that. It's really important to know how your children learn best so that you can tailor what they're doing, what you're learning with them, all the time. But also, what about the emotional and social factors that affect their learning as well, Brett? Like, that's obviously really important no matter what learning preference they have.
Yeah, and again, this feeds back to, we've done an episode on this around communication. We could do 100 episodes and never be fully done with that topic. But effectively, all of these elements fall under the barrier of communication as well. It's like your ability to architect and articulate your words in a written format will naturally increase your ability to articulate and architect your words in the verbal context and the ability to be able to actually have the discussion, right? Your ability to be able to hear how these words sound and resonate and the impact that these words have, they all are a cumulative effect for the end outcome, which is how do we set our children up for success when it comes to learning, right? These are skills that, yes, you might find that your child is an auditory learner in the early years of their life, but it's like that will, once they can uncover that and they're aware of that and they understand that that's actually okay, that you like to listen to something but your best friend likes to, have hands-on experiences, et cetera, by knowing, first of all, we're all different, which is a really good thing to know and understand. Because again, one of those things was I got kicked out of class a lot because I just did not like reading the books. I just thought all I seen was words. Numbers, just like maths. I passed through my subjects, but it just was not exhilarating at all. But then when I became a cabinet maker and I had to learn how to grab a measuring tape and go to the floor and mark out an entire kitchen for a house and work out a cutting list and do all of these things, I was just like, oh my God, I love maths. I was like, oh, now I see what maths was all about, right? So I just found a different way to apply these specific ways of learning. And I think once we can do that for our children, it'll open up an experience for them where, now, not necessarily every child's going to love learning, but I'm yet to find a child who, when they find something they love doing, it cannot be applied to learning. Like everything can be applied to learning. And it really comes back to identifying that there is a framework to help your child learn better from, which is what we're talking about here, and then spending the time identifying that. But then thirdly, just to wrap that piece up, is to amplify it to another level. It's then you take all of that learning that they've created and you get them to teach it to you, right? Like the amount of things that I've taught my wife that I know she has zero interest in hearing, I did it for my benefit of, hey, did you know about this, and I'm trying to learn history, and history is quite complex, right? Because there's so many different things that have gone on, and you got to remember all the way back to 1763 when XYZ happened, and so you don't remember that by just reading it or listening to it. Like that sort of stuff you have to be able to teach and open up an environment where your child can, and again, not to teach you everything, but the things that they're passionate about, if they're allowed to teach that, you're going to start to see an entirely different child transform in front of your eyes, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, if we're looking now at the practical, what does it look like in an everyday environment as a homeschooling parent? That will come down to being able to look at the lessons that you've got for your child, the program that you've got for your child, and saying, okay, in the Euka program, each one of our lessons has an auditory section, has a visual section, has a video, it'll have an activity sheet for kids that like that reading and writing, have a practical activity to do. And so making those decisions on each lesson now, as in a practical sense, you're not going to do every hands-on activity first, a maths one, then an English one, then a science one, but choose one. And what I have often found as a parent homeschooling is I might choose a hands-on activity that will be really engaging for them. It might be something that they're doing in science, but while that's going on, we might be talking about something that's happening in history, because like you said before, sometimes they'll learn something better while they're busy making something. They're actually able to talk or listen to something in a much better way because it's not that intense, focused talking and listening kind of way, and that's not the way they learn best. So sometimes mine have enjoyed having an audio book on that's the novel that they're doing for English, but they might be making something at the same time for art. So different ways of being able to say, okay, I know we need to listen to the book. I know they'd prefer to listen to it than read it. Then, when will they listen best? And maybe while they're doing something. So that's on a practical level. As a parent, you'll work through what works best for your child, and then it'll be far more enjoyable. A lot of the times where you've got a child who's really negative about what they're being asked to do, you need to stop and go, why is that? Because kids naturally want to learn. You see them, you think to yourself, my goodness, well, from the time they're crawling around, they're already in search of learning. They're just got a thirst to learn. So we want that natural desire to learn to still be going, still be leading them as they're growing up. So if you do find you're butting heads about something that you're learning, think about, is it the way that the learning's being done rather than just the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And another big thing that is very important when it relates to learning is the utilization of stories, right? Stories, metaphors are very, very, very powerful tools that you can use. Now, if it doesn't come naturally to you, obviously it takes a little bit of work. But what you'll realize is a lot of the most powerful lessons in the world come via movies and shows that have been architected in such a way that there's an underlying theme behind it, right? And yeah, there's a reason why the Dumbo movie, Disney's Dumbo, why everyone viscerally gets like. I mean, I was as a child, I almost say it traumatized me that when Dumbo got taken away from his mum. But there's a reason why we connect with that, because it's metaphorical. It's a connectiveness of, it wasn't really the sadness of Dumbo leaving its mum. It was me leaving my mum, right? So stories have depth and they can really help. And this is more for advice for parents who, when your child's trying to learn something and you're like, well, read the words. That's all there is. Or I don't know any other way to say it, right? Is you can add that extra special sauce, and by trying to tell them something in a slightly different way, and stories can really, really be beneficial there. For me, and I've mentioned this a number of times on the podcast, when I was in physics class, like physics is a really interesting topic. Now I love it, but at high school I was just like, this is just, because it took too much for me to try and understand. So I was like, I'll put in the too hard basket, because I'd constantly ask questions, go, hey, what about this? How do I do this? And the teacher would explain it the same way to me all the time. I'm just like, okay, I've heard you say that now 3 times. Clearly, I don't understand it. And a friend would say, hey, it's this. I'm like, I don't, okay, why didn't he just say that, right? But if that was as easy as it was to communicate, then there'd be no problems in the world ever. But it really is a great opportunity for you as a parent to, where you can be involved in the outcome of the learning. And you can do that by strapping on these extra tools and at the end of the day, obviously doing a bit of a recap, getting them to teach you, getting them to replay it back to you. And then, of course, if what don't they understand, let's talk about that. And then for you to be able to provide extra context around stories or metaphors or, it's like a specific metaphor might be something along the lines. Let's say I'm trying to get Ayla to stop doing something, right? And she doesn't understand why. And then I have to explain to her it's a different story. It's like, so the other day, she found a bug, right? And it was in the pool, and she found a bug, and she wanted to squash the bug for whatever reason. I had to tell her a story that bug's mummy's looking for it, and don't hurt the bug. And she didn't realize when I said, "Oh, don't do that. That's mean. That's not that's naughty." Like that didn't. It's like, still want to do it. But when I added the context of the story of going, that little bug has a mummy that it wants to go home to, and it's trying to get home, and then all of a sudden, just immediately the shift in her, and she was just empathetic, like, "Oh, I'll help the bug," and then she's trying to help the bug and trying to find its mum, and like it just starts a whole different thing. But stories are another way to really anchor in learning moments for your children.
Absolutely. Look, I would say learning style is really important. It helps as a guide to where you're going. But at the end of the day, it's most important to let your child be a leader in them initiating what it is or how it is that they learn best. There'll always be some subjects that they don't warm to or they don't love, and there'll be others that they just do all day. Well, let them do those ones all day. And the ones they don't love, do what you need to do to get the learning done in a style that works for them. But that's one of the wonderful things about homeschooling, that opportunity to let them really thrive in areas that they really love and in a way that they can really engage. So that's one of the big wins in homeschooling, I'd say.
Awesome. Ellen, anything else to wrap up this episode? I think we covered a fair bit in a shorter period of time.
Yes, I think we did. I think we've done a great job on that. I think it's just a matter of, trial and error, like everything as a parent. Trial and error is the way to go. But I think also I'd challenge you to go out and find out about your own learning style. I bet you haven't even thought about how you learn best. And I think it'll be I think doing that for yourself as a parent will actually really help you then get some context around how you can best support your children in their learning.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much for tuning into this episode. If you've gotten value from this, please share this episode with someone that you also think will get value from it. And of course, head over to all those platforms, drop us 5-star reviews, like, subscribe, all of those beautiful things that you can do at the disposal of your tap of your thumb on your phone. Ellen, thank you so much. And we will see you on the next episode.